Magical. We use this word all the time, yet we rarely question what we're actually trying to describe. If you watch this video until the end, you will finally see the old dream your mind has been hiding from you. And for the first time in your life, you may understand why you've been trapped in the same fears, the same cycles, the same unexplained pain for years. For anyone who stays until the end, this video won't just pull you out of a nightmare, it will show you where that nightmare began. If you're ready, we're going down into your unconscious now. As adults, anything we call magical is simply something our logic can't explain. But our soul remembers too well: a sky that glows, a melody that refuses to leave your mind, a child's drawing of a flying cat with human eyes, a dream that feels more real than waking life ever does. When I was 4 years old, there was a girl in my preschool class who carried a tiny backpack. On the front of it, there was a cartoon creature flying freely through a bright blue sky. And I would stare at that picture for so long. I didn't know why, but something in me reacted. As if through its eyes, my imagination lifted me into the sky, weightless, timeless, untouched by anything heavy. Looking back now, I think that might have been the closest I ever came to enlightenment, because that feeling was pure, innocent, limitless. For a moment, it felt like the sky wasn't something I looked at. It was something I belonged to. I still remember the face of that little creature. And yes, it was magical. But magical isn't a word for fantasy. It's a word for something we once knew intimately, and then forgot. This isn't imagination. This is memory. Because when an adult watches a film that gives them chills, or hears a song that feels like it came from another world, they call it magical. But that world isn't fictional. It's a trace of a perception we had before we learned the names of things. A longing for a state of being we once lived inside every single day. That's the irony. We use the word magical to describe the most real reality we've ever known. The one before ego, before identity, before we learned how to shrink our own vision. It's not nostalgia. It's a doorway back to the home we forgot. This is a psychic echo from a time when every object shimmered with possibility. And once we actually lived inside that world. As infants, there were no definitions to ruin our curiosity. No categories, no labels. Everything was new. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because nothing had been reduced to a name yet. The front door wasn't just a door leading to a hallway. It could just as easily be a passage into a forest where trees could speak. A kitchen chair wasn't merely a chair, it was a throne. A puddle wasn't water, it was a portal. The world wasn't flat, it wasn't ordinary, it wasn't divided, because language hadn't carved it into pieces yet. And so everything glowed. The ego hadn't formed. There was no me, no world, only experience itself. No boundary between inside and outside. No, this is me, or that is something else. Everything was alive. Everything was exactly where it belonged. This is the world babies live in. A place where magic is never questioned, because magic is the default state. And as adults, without even realizing it, we spend our entire lives trying to return there. That's why we create stories where animals sing and objects have souls. That's why myths still move us. That's why a wordless piece of music can make us cry. Because music slips past the ego and touches the version of us that existed before we knew what anything meant. We write novels about children walking into other worlds, through wardrobes and falling through rabbit holes into unknown realms, because some part of us remembers what it felt like when every corridor, every staircase, every dark room held the possibility of a hidden mystery waiting to open. Magical is simply the closest word we have. It's the longing for what was once unfiltered, for the impossible state that once felt natural, for a landscape that didn't need proof to be real, for a time when every outcome was still alive. Seeing the world this way isn't childish, it's primal. It's the mind before certainty, the dream of the soul before the world captured it. One day the living room was a forest, the next day a kingdom. The crib was a spaceship, the closet was a doorway to something they longed for and feared. Imagination isn't something added on top of reality. Imagination is reality, before anything is reduced to what it should be, while everything is still shimmering. But this dream world is fragile. It twists and flows like a stream until something sharp disturbs its waters. If a child is safe, the dream becomes a sanctuary, filled with warm voices, glowing smiles, soothing sounds, and protective arms. But if a child does not feel safe, if a parent yells or disappears, if a stranger touches them in a way that fractures innocence, if love is withdrawn, if pain enters too soon, then the magical realm cracks. The door to Narnia no longer opens to wonder, it opens to nightmares. The forest becomes haunted, the sky turns gray, and the dream, the world they live in, becomes impossible to describe, because at that age they cannot yet tell what is real and what isn't. They can't. A child's spirit is like a sponge still forming its shape. So if fear enters the dream, they absorb it. If betrayal enters the dream, they become betrayal. If something violent or chaotic happens, they don't think this is wrong. They think this is how the world works. And this is why early childhood trauma does more than hurt. It rewrites reality. It distorts the architecture of the dream. A parent who disappears becomes a ghost in the child's inner world. A scream echoing down the hallway becomes thunder in their nightmares. A slap becomes the claw of a monster, and the abuser becomes a shape-shifting shadow that follows them well into adulthood. Many adults don't remember their trauma, not because it wasn't real, but because their developing mind had no language big enough to hold it. So the trauma gets stored in symbols, dreams, unexplained fears, and repeating patterns, chronic illness, insomnia, anxiety with no clear source. When the dream world turns into a horror film, the body records it. The nervous system stays on high alert. The mind loops in confusion, and the child who once danced through dream landscapes now wakes at 3 a.m., heart pounding, soaked in sweat, drowning in fear. Why? Because the unconscious never forgets. This is where fever dreams enter the story. Not random bursts of imagination during illness, but true eruptions of unresolved past. Whispers of reality piercing through a mind too foggy to remember consciously. What do these dreams reveal? They show the child lost, alone in a world shifting beneath their feet, running up staircases that lead nowhere, trying to scream but having no mouth, looking into mirrors and not recognizing their own face. This is the unspoken scream of a mind that never had the chance to understand what happened. A child doesn't say, "I experienced trauma." A child says, "I must be a monster. I must not be real. I must be bad. I don't know what happened, but it must have been my fault." And when they grow up, they forget the dream. But the dream does not forget them. The same doorway that once opened into a land of singing animals now opens into a corridor of shadows. Faces shift, objects warp, time bends out of shape. The dream world collapses into psychic chaos. I've been trying to make a video about this for a long time, but I never knew how to put it into words. How do you take someone into an infant's dream state, into that place where every movement of the parent ripples through the child as fear and confusion? This part of the journey, this cliff edge, arrived during my own inner work. When I finally reached the last layer of psychological and physical tension, I began having vivid dreams about my childhood. But they weren't memories I could recall. They were experiences, felt, not remembered, and they were terrifying. In one dream, I was dancing as a child, but I had no idea who I was. Nothing made sense. The world was unrecognizable. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening. There was only confusion, pure chaos, a kind of psychological terror no child should ever feel. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a dream. It was the unconscious memory of the loss of control I felt as a child. That deep, bottomless helplessness. Because when you grow up, even as a baby, in an unsafe environment, you never know what will happen next. Every shadow, every loud noise, every slammed door becomes a monster in your mind. You can't understand it. You can't process it. You can only feel it, and that feeling becomes a loop inside your nervous system. It becomes your foundation. This is how trauma is stored, not in the mind, but in the body, in the unconscious. And this is why so many of us get physically sick, because that psychological confusion, that fear, searches for a way out. It appears as fever dreams, insomnia, or physical symptoms we can't explain. I remember the nights I couldn't sleep as a child, not because of bad habits, but because my own thoughts frightened me. I didn't even know what the world was, and yet I was already drowning in it. As we grow older, these memories become so unreachable, we don't even realize they happened. They become ghosts trapped in the walls of the house we grew up in, silent, but always present. And then we wonder why we feel broken, why we sabotage ourselves, why we're triggered by things we can't even name. Because the child inside us never had the chance to make sense of any of it. And I fell into this loop again and again. This is what pre-verbal trauma is. It leaves no memory, only an imprint, a sensation, a fever, a fracture. A baby doesn't think, this is abuse. They think, I don't feel safe. I'm confused. Something must be wrong with me. I must be mistaken. This is not a metaphor. This is how the unconscious records reality before the mind learns how to label it. And when these fractured dreams remain unresolved, they don't just linger as vague memories. They continue in the body, in the immune system, in insomnia, in anxiety, in dissociation, in autoimmune storms that appear later in life as real illness. Many adults believe their depression, their exhaustion, their nightmares come from stress, but they don't. They come from the old dream, the one still unfolding in the depths of a soul that never learned who it was, never understood what was happening, never figured out how to wake up. The dream realm becomes haunted, and the child never truly leaves it. Yes, they grow up, but a part of them stays trapped there, still 5 years old, still terrified, still spinning in circles trying to understand the meaning of a scream. And this is where shadow work begins, because the shadow is not just your bad habits or your buried anger. It is the story you were never allowed to tell. It is the dream no one ever witnessed. It is the fear you could never name. So your body named it for you, through trembling, panic, illness, fatigue, addiction, in dream analysis, especially in depth psychology and Jungian therapy. We see this clearly. Dreams are not random. They are screams coded in symbols. A collapsing house, a child crying in the corner, a face without a mouth, a parent turning into a monster. These are not creative images. These are real psychological facts that have never been digested. You may have a fever and see yourself as a child in a twisted world. You try to speak, but no sound comes out. You try to move, but the walls melt. Everything becomes cyclical, a surreal vortex. This is not madness. This is memory. So tell me, which old dream is your body still carrying? Write even one sentence in the comments about what surfaced for you today. The body, the soul, the mind, all trying desperately to wake the child still trapped in the nightmare. And the most terrifying part? Most people have no idea this is happening. They don't even remember the trauma. Because early trauma does not enter the brain as words, it enters as atmosphere. That's why they don't remember the facts, but they live the patterns. They date people who embody instability. They fear joy because it reminds them of the moment before the scream. They develop chronic symptoms that no doctor can explain. And inside them, the child is still dancing, still reaching, still hoping the door will take them back to the magic. But until you re-enter that dream world consciously, it remains a forgotten theater, repeating its fear in the background, night after night, symptom after symptom, shadow after shadow. If you felt your inner child stirring while listening, this space is for you. Subscribe and come back whenever your heart needs a place to rest.